Hi friends, thank you for tuning in to the Concussion Coach podcast. I'm Bethany Lewis, the Concussion Coach. I'm a neurological occupational therapist and certified life coach, and I specialize in guiding people through their concussion recovery journey. I am passionate about helping people understand their injury, speed up their recovery, and reclaim control over their life post-concussion. The purpose of this podcast is to help increase awareness of concussions and the impact they can have on a person's life, and to bring hope to people who have suffered a concussion and those who love them. I firmly believe that sharing stories and knowledge about concussions will bring important light and understanding to this misunderstood and often invisible injury. The information in this podcast is meant to bring that awareness and hope and is not meant as medical advice. The opinions shared are those of the interviewees and my own. If you are suffering with lingering concussion symptoms, I have created a concussion coaching program specifically for you. I will be your mentor to guide you through your recovery journey, offering help with understanding and managing your symptoms, setting achievable goals, and learning how to manage your own thoughts and nervous system in order to get control over your life again. If this program sounds like something that would help you or someone you love, sign up for a free consultation. In the consultation, you'll get valuable information and resources and gain hope for your future. Sign up for your free consultation at the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Hi friends, welcome back to the Concussion Coach podcast. I'm excited to introduce you today to my friend and fellow brain injury coach, Kaylee Blair. Kaylee has suffered 2 intense brain injuries and knows personally the reality of what it means to recover from brain injury, as well as the way it can impact the survivor and their loved ones. Equipped with a bachelor's degree in science, certification in neuro-linguistic programming, 2+ years as a vision therapist, and her knowledge of concussion treatment through cognitive FX, both as a patient and as a patient care coordinator, Kaylee guides and supports other survivors on their recovery journey. Kaylee and I each have our own coaching practices, which we started before we met each other. And then after meeting each other at Cognitive FX, we decided to combine forces and create another separate coaching program specifically for people who have completed the treatment program at Cognitive FX and who need some extra support in their continued recovery. It has been a great experience working with Kaylee. She's a fantastic person, and I'm excited for you to get to hear her story and some of her wisdom today. So thank you for being here, Kaylee.
Thank you. This is exciting.
It is. It's going to be so fun. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What do you love?
I was like childhood in St. George, Utah, and then teenage years were in a little town called Manti, Utah through and through.
And what else do you love? You forgot to answer that question.
Oh man, I love a lot of things. I love people. I love music. I dabble in the guitar and ukulele and singing and piano. I have fun there. I love hanging out with family. I have a dream of having a scooter gang. So let's all buy electric scooters.
I'm in. That sounds amazing. What would we do as scooter gang people?
We'd ride around like the cool people we are.
Fantastic. I'm in. All right. Let's
probably go give flowers to people. I don't know.
I love it. Okay. So right now you are working at Cognitive FX as well as doing your own coaching practice, right? What do you do at CFX right now?
Great question. Right now, I am the head patient care coordinator. So I get to work with an amazing team at Cognitive FX, where we are on the ground helping patients left and right, wherever we can. We do certain therapies with them and guide them along the process of concussion recovery in our clinic as they go through treatment.
Thank you. And you have had 2 brain injuries, right? So, and you said that you've 2 kind of major ones and have had other smaller hits to the head, I guess. But tell us about those. How long ago were they and what happened with each of them?
Sure. So the first major brain injury I had was the end of 2017. It was in November. I had gone in for a very, very minor routine surgery that was going to take about an hour. And then I woke up from that routine surgery with a brain injury. Nobody had known that I woke up with the brain injury until days, months later. But when I woke up, I was stuttering a lot, and everything was a little bit slower, coming off of anesthesia. Everybody's like, you're fine. Just go home, sleep it off type of a thing, which I agreed. I was like, yeah, I don't know what's going on. We'll just sleep. And then the next day was probably the scariest moment for me. That was when I realized something was really wrong. I was left alone for about 8 hours. And in that 8 hours, I had to use the walls to go to the bathroom. As I would get up to go to the bathroom, I'd forget what I was doing. And there was a lot of confusion, a lot of panic, a lot of fear. I was still stuttering. I couldn't quite speak right. I couldn't quite get what I needed to say out either, whether there was a stutter or not. So my balance was off. I couldn't remember what to eat, let alone almost kind of how to eat. I couldn't compute to make the decisions to go out to the kitchen enough to find something, let alone get there, if that even makes sense. My emotions were through the roof. I couldn't figure out why, but I would be so panicked and scared. And I knew internally something was really off. Looking back, it basically felt like somebody took a snow globe and turned it upside down and kept it there. Like my life just kind of went,
It all came in that first day afterwards, like that's when it all hit.
Yeah. So that first day I went home, slept, it was great. And then it was the next day that things started hitting. And I remember my mom drove up that night because something was desperately wrong. I was 25. I had just graduated with my bachelor's. I was looking forward to doing other things with my life. And that night, a friend came over, packed me up, and I left. I went home to my parents' house, my wonderful parents, and then started our journey of trying to figure things out. We had called the emergency line to the doctor that had done the procedure. He's a OBGYN, and he was stumped. He had done procedures like that a million times over, never had any problems. In the end, after a lot of doctor's visits, and kudos to him, he was actually the person I ended up trusting the most because he was the most passionate about trying to figure out what was going on. We looked at, was there a hole in your heart? Did oxygen leak through somehow and get to your brain? We looked at so many things. And in the end, they could never exactly pinpoint, except to say, we think something in the anesthesia didn't mix well and created this. So I ended up finally getting in to see a neurologist. I also at the time had been working for a place that was so kind to me. They tried really hard to work with me and I had to stop working. I couldn't even work from home. I could barely communicate, let alone it was a tough time and a bit of a dark time. But I guess I can talk a little bit more about that later. But basically, saw a neurologist and he said, hey, yeah, this is a mild brain injury. Go ahead and go home, and in about 4 to 6 months, you'll be fine. And I was really angry when that was said. Internally, I had the sense that was off. Nothing about it feels mild. Although in comparison to the other severe injuries they see, it is mild. Doesn't mean the symptoms are mild though. So I went home and we tried that for a few months. And
What did he give you anything to do, or just said?
Basically just went home. I tried to substitute teach for a little while. I tried to just go outside. Part of the trauma of that experience was before that brain injury, I felt fairly close to God. And after that brain injury, I couldn't feel him anymore. And I couldn't escape my own brain and the severe pain that you feel physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, like in every regard. There was just extreme pain, no matter where I looked or turned, whether I would close my eyes, open my mouth, close my mouth, eat, didn't eat, just severe pain. And so being able to get through that, I didn't know how to, because I didn't have that support anymore. Because beforehand, when things would go wrong, I'd say, well, at least I've got me and God. God, that'll take care of me. It'll be okay. But then I couldn't feel him anymore. So finally, one evening, I was pleading with God one night. I said, I need you to help me, because the pain is severe enough. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. I don't know what to do here. And my family didn't know what to do. They were amazing. They did the best they could, and I did too, but we just didn't know. And I would have to say one of the most impactful things during that time was that my parents believed me, that they believed things were very wrong, and that they trusted that. I was very grateful for that. That changed a lot for me. So that night I was pleading with God, and eventually I said, I know you can break through whatever this is, and I know you can reach me because you're God. And you can do that. And so little by little, I started to be reminded very gently of who God was to me, who my Savior was, and then who I was to God. And that eventually helped me to remember who I was. But it had to come little by little in a way that only a higher power could do. But that once that shift happened, that helped me. So having a higher power, whatever that is for people, can and will make an immense difference for people.
How long into the injury process did you have that experience and that turnaround?
I think it was about 2.5 months in, maybe 3 months, because it feels like you're just kind of living in, for lack of a better word, forgive me, it just feels like you're kind of living in hell, and you can't escape. Your old escape routes never work. And I think many other people can relate to that who have had injuries or traumatic experiences.
Yeah. And did you, when you started to feel that and you started to come to yourself and God again, what changed? Like what was different after that?
After that, I felt lighter. it was like a reconfirmation to myself that I wasn't alone and that I would see something, like something shifted in me that felt a little bit more hopeful. Even if I would be stuck in those symptoms, I still somehow felt a little bit more hopeful. I remember the world felt a little bit brighter. And then that was about the same time that I did start to substitute teach a little bit. It was really hard. But going through that experience, I just kept feeling like this nudge that was like, just keep going. From the beginning, I had this feeling that, why can't I heal more? Why settle? And so I kept pushing through whatever. And because seeing doctors, a lot of times they didn't know what to do. That neurologist gave me a couple different pain relievers to try to handle the severe headaches and migraines. They only did so much. In fact, most of them did very little for me. And some people finally help, which I'm glad they do, but it didn't quite work for me. And they were very cautious about giving pain relievers to me or any type of medicine because of how the injury occurred.
Right.
So my speech slowly started to kind of come on its own as well. I had seen a speech therapist maybe twice, 3 times, but I, again, wasn't in a place to recover with that speech therapist. I was too far still in the depths of things, I think.
After you started feeling that connection with God again, how long was the process from then? Like, or was that just like a turning point and then things kind of went up from there? Or was there, can you define like, okay, from then until here is when I had this major turnaround?
Yeah. So from then until probably, so let's see, that was in like November when the incident happened. It was probably around February where I had that experience where I felt God. And then from there, things started to feel like a shift just a little bit. That was also where I kind of felt a little bit inspired to share what happened with my experience online a little bit, and where I tried to find a way to find purpose again. I didn't quite know who I was, still felt like a stranger in my own body, but I knew of myself, if that makes sense at that point, because there's that loss of self. You're completely changed after something like that. It feels like a complete change. So from then until probably about the summertime, I was to a point where we still didn't understand what was going on. So I tried to move back up north and I tried to do things, but there were several times I would start driving and forget where I was going, or I'd drive on the wrong side of the road, or there were quite a few times. Probably shouldn't have survived certain things, but I definitely did. I think that summer I also applied for over 50 jobs. I interviewed about 30. And I got a job probably 5 different times, and the job always fell through somehow, some fluky thing. I thought I was going crazy. My parents were like, "What's wrong?" I was like, "I don't know what's going on here." I would miss the same appointment 5 or 10 times because even though I would put it on my calendar, I'd put it everywhere I could think, I would still somehow miss it. So there were so many frustrations. I really felt like I was going crazy with my emotions, with everything. I no longer wanted to hang out with people very often. It was exhausting. Whereas beforehand, I was pretty great extrovert, and I still had some stuttering. And this is a very vulnerable place to be in when you're in that injury process. So then my brother was like, probably about June, July, he was like, "Hey, come move down to St. George with us and we'll help you get back on your feet again." And I was like, okay. So I headed on down south. And at that point, I found a therapist that was willing to kind of train with me. She had never worked with somebody with a brain injury like me. And so we kind of figured things out together to help me emotionally and mentally and start climbing through. And then about August, ended up having a knee injury. I had to go under anesthesia again, but I didn't have a brain injury that time. So I had to relearn how to walk in the span of a year, probably twice, because of the brain injury and then because of that. More like walk well. It wasn't full on learning how to baby step it again at that point. So then we found cognitive effects. My dad did through like a string of events that you're like, whoa, only God, the universe, whatever people believe in, God definitely helped me. So found them and I was able to get into them probably in February of 2019. And that was kind of the boost to calming my emotional regulation. That was the biggest thing for me. And then it helped me get into the right lanes that I needed to for brain injury recovery. It helped me get into the right world, which I was beyond grateful for.
Yeah. So you went into CFX like a little over almost a year and a half after the initial incident. And how was your experience there? You said it helped get you back on the right track? Were you like healed afterwards? What was your experience there?
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say I felt exactly like healed, but the biggest problem for me going in there was my emotional regulation. I still felt crazy. and my emotional regulation. I would get angry all of a sudden, I'd get sad all of a sudden, I'd be super anxious all of a sudden. I couldn't handle it. And I was like, what is happening? And it would be for no reason. Whereas beforehand, again, I would compare myself to an old Kaylee and I'd be like, what the heck is going on? Because beforehand, I didn't struggle too much with anger. I was a pretty happy-go-lucky person, and not anymore. So, and my poor family, I don't really remember a ton of what all they had to deal with that in regards to that, but I know they did. I'm grateful for them. So they were able, they helped sit me down and recognize tell me I wasn't crazy, that I did have a brain injury, and they could show me on a scan. And that was such a relief, but also a shock, because it kind of pinpoints all of the ways that things have been going wrong. Whereas your awareness of things is very limited. And sometimes I think that's a blessing at first, because you can't quite handle it. And then when it comes, it comes. So anyways, they helped with that emotional regulation. And that was peace and a calm that I needed. And then all the other things, they got me on the right track. So vision therapy, doing things at home to work on things. I worked on nutrition as well as my own emotional and mental being all the time. So
awesome. So do you feel like you eventually got back to yourself before the second brain injury happened, or what? Tell us a little bit more about the next steps in the process.
Sure. Well, in order for me to recover, I remember there was a point that I got to where I needed to stop comparing against my old self. It was great to look back and remember that Kaylee. She's amazing. I love her. But I actually wanted to become better than that version of me. I wanted to become Kaylee 2.0. And so I became more than what I was. And that has always been the plan. And that has helped me a lot.
I think that's a helpful thing for people to hear. Just that perspective, I think, can be really beneficial. So you were doing better. When did your second injury occur?
Yeah, second injury occurred in 2020 when everything, COVID hit, and I wasn't even worried about COVID at that point because I had a second injury going on.
Do you feel like you had gotten mostly back to yourself when that second one happened?
I was doing better. I definitely had to work at it. I got to work for an amazing neurooptometrist doing vision therapy. I was a vision therapist at that point, so I was able to work, and he helped me ease into the work process and taught me so much there. I've been so grateful for that experience. It was the perfect job. I got to help other people with brain injuries and people who didn't have brain injuries, help with their visual skills and honing in on those so that they could better function in life, which in turn helped me. So yeah, I was to the point where I think I still got headaches and a few migraines every now and then. And I did still deal with some fatigue. So I was still building my nervous system up. But other than that, I was cruising much better than before.
That's great. And so then what happened?
I went to a very, I guess there's different types of chiropractic care. And I went to kind of a very, I guess I don't have a better word for it, but it was more simple, basic chiropractic, and went that day after a day of work. And he had done a certain adjustment that was to my neck that caused me about a half hour later. I lost all motor function. I lost the ability to speak well again. My body would shake all over. It was like my brain to body connection was gone. So I couldn't walk by myself. It was like I would try to move my arm a certain direction. It would go the other direction. I was afraid to try to read or to ride a bike, or to do all the basic things that I knew before, because it was like files were there, but my brain couldn't get to them. And so I remember the first time I wrote after that experience, I was so scared, and it was so hard at first, and I started to cry. And I remember my mom sitting next to me, and I was like, Mom, I can't write. And she was like, it's okay. Take a deep breath. Just remember the letter. And so I would remember the letter. I was at my nephew's baptism. But that injury, they called it a central nervous system injury. I ended up going to the ER maybe a few days after the incident happened and found the right doctor there who sent me to the right physiatrist. I had never heard of that type of doctor before until that moment. And I loved the doctor I saw. He got me straight away into neuro rehab with doing intensive physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. And it took me about 2 months to get back what before took me about 1 year to 2 years.
Wow.
Most of what I needed to get back. It was excruciating and very painful. It feels kind of like when your body's shaking like that, it feels like it's like a Charlie horse, but all over your body. And so that first week particularly, there was no relief. Most relaxants hardly touch things. Again, there's a lot of pain involved, and a lot of anger at that point. Because I was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, that's fair. So I'm intrigued by this. So they called it a central nervous system injury, it wasn't like a brain injury because it happened in your neck, but it was motor as well as cognitive issues that happened.
Mm-hmm. In fact, actually, so in the first injury, I had to relearn how to make decisions and how to think logically. But in this injury, that was more of just hazy. I didn't have to go back to square one. It was just kind of hazy. This one was more motor function, speech, my ability to, I think decision making was still a part of it, as well as, I don't know, yeah, logical thinking was a part of it. I keep bringing up this awareness because after an injury, there are certain things you're unaware of until you become aware of them. I don't have a better way to say that.
Like, what do you mean, awareness of what?
How bad it is.
Okay.
Or what you're experiencing.
Yeah, actually does make sense. So this time you were sent straight to people who knew how to help with those kinds of injuries right away. And it sped up the healing process, it sounds like.
Yes, in a lot of ways, except for a few.
Okay. And the full body Charlie horse thing, what caused that? Like, do you know what was going on with those, or how often did they happen?
Well, again, at that point, all the imaging they took of my neck, of my head, everything looked okay. All the MRIs, I did so many types of imaging, but I never did x-rays until a later time. But I did take muscle relaxants where I could. I took pain relievers where I could, but the two things I found were probably the most unexpected things for me. I did not plan on them. I just was desperate for relief, and I was willing to do whatever, whenever. As you can imagine, if you're in extreme pain constantly, you can't find any relief, right?
Yeah.
There was an alternative doctor that my mom knows of, that my family has gone to, and they had a certain type of laser treatment. They were able to get me in 2 days after the incident happened. And all they did was sit me down, and they used this laser gun of sorts to just shine it along my neck and my spine and my head. And my stuttering and my shakiness completely stopped for about an hour, which was better than anything else had ever done for me. The other thing that was discovered was, for me, again, this is a natural product, but it's inositol. To my understanding, hospitals use it to calm somebody in a panic attack. It can be used for anxiety, that type of thing, but it actually helps to relax my muscles a lot of times better than the muscle relaxant did.
Interesting. That's a natural product. It's not a medicine.
It's just it's something you can get on Amazon, inositol. And I did notice it did calm anxieties for me as well. I had a dear friend that came the next day and helped me as well, helped feed me, helped with whatever I needed. It's so important for people just to be with each other. And that's what that friend was, as well as that amazing clinic I worked for, New Sight Vision Therapy. They were also amazing and worked with me. They were also in shock because they had seen me the day before. And then they saw me that day and they're like, what happened? I was like, yeah, good question.
So when did you start the other therapies and stuff?
I'd say probably the second week or so. And they also had to be really careful with me because certain things would set different things off. I think one of the hardest things for me was my ability to organize, my ability to put things together, if that makes sense, in an organized fashion. The speech therapist was monumental in helping with the brain injury recovery as well. He had put together a program because he'd worked with brain injuries for over 25 years. And I worked through his program specifically in that I realized I needed to prioritize the brain injury recovery above my own frustrations with it or pain or whatever I wanted to do or whatever came. And so as I allowed essentially my nervous system to recover in the ways that it needed to, I saw an increase in result.
How did you do that? How do you let your nervous system recover?
He was actually the first person that taught me a certain type of gauge system to determine where I was at, when I needed to stop, when I needed to go. He created it was like a whole series of, it was like level 1, you start here, level 2, you do this, level 3, and level 4. But from what I remember, it was breaks, brain waves. I had brain waves. There's a brainwaves app you can get. If you don't know about it, I recommend it. If you have an iPhone, it's called Brainwaves 35 binaural programs. You use headphones with it. But anything that would help my brain calmed down. So the inositol was instrumental in that. That laser light was instrumental. I bought an eye mask and noise canceling headphones. I took my headphones everywhere with me. The brain injury recovery was first and foremost. So I stopped working for 2 months. And that was my main goal, was recovery. Day in, day out recovery. And it's intensive and tiring to do that, but that's what it called for. So it's about the right kind of breaks to take for yourself. Anything that will de-stim, or like eye palming, napping, going for a little walk, listening to positive affirmations, meditation. There's so many ways to regulate your nervous system. Those were a few I used there. Most of the time I just had to sleep.
So a lot of sleep therapies, knowing the right kind of breaks and things to do to de-stim. And you were off for about 2 months, and you said that helped bring you back out of it. You were doing a lot better by the end of that couple of months.
Yeah, I had to ease into working again. Again, my amazing boss was willing to work with me. I started probably part-time and then slowly eased up. I do remember every time that I increased hours, my body would go through it. There were lots of times I would sit in my car for maybe an hour and a half after work to let my body stop. Like, it would build up and it would start to shake by the end of the day. And then I would have to just breathe and allow it to pass. And eventually I could be calm enough and safe enough to drive myself the 20 minutes home. So that's what it would take. And a lot of times I had to have rides for the first while as well, everywhere. I couldn't drive. I couldn't trust my body for a long while.
So when you say you would shake, was this the same from before, where it was like a full body Charlie horse?
It would come and go in different ways. So it's like a sensation. Let's see. It's like when your arms and legs start to feel numb a little bit. That's it's not numb, but it's a sensation. And then it's like shaky, like your hands will shake, my arms will feel heavy and weak, my neck will start to feel some extreme pain, my legs will start to not want to move. It starts with not wanting to move, and then it goes to I can't move. And so then it kind of would go through that cycle, and eventually for a long while I would have to call somebody, mostly my mom, and I would say, okay, this is happening. She'd say, okay, breathe, let's work through it. And then we worked through it, and eventually I would calm enough and let things pass. It was like my body learned that was how it needed to let go of stress, and whatever kind of stress. And so I had to relearn how to not do that. And that's what has taken time.
Interesting. Do you feel like, so it wasn't necessarily like anxiety, like panic attack kind of stuff? It was more like body, not mental.
Well, emotions were involved, but I knew these emotions were because my nervous system was shot, was exhausted and tired. Eventually I would it's like you level up. So like I would work for a certain amount of hours and it'd be like, oh, I'm finally to a point where I can function here. Great. Let's stay here for a minute. And then it was like, oh, okay, now I got to step it up a little bit more due to whatever needs to happen. Right. And then I knew it would be hard again. And I'm still working on figuring out how to make that an easier process, hopefully for other people when they need to do that. But again, that nervous system regulation tends to be key, at least in my recovery and with all the people I've worked with.
Yes. So. Yep. That is a recurring theme for sure. So how long did these shaking sessions happen? Like how often did they happen, and how long did they usually last? And are you past those at this point?
Yeah, those they slowly started to dissipate for a while, and then eventually they kind of started to pick back up again. I remember the first time it happened again out of the blue. Basically, I was writing something and I dropped my pen and I started shaking again with that pain in my neck, and it feels like someone's electrocuting you from your neck on, essentially. There you go. And so that would happen. And the first time it happened, it maybe lasted a couple minutes. But I remember calling my sister. She came down and she just gave me sensory. She tugged me. She told me it was okay. And she rubbed my arm, and that reminded my brain, oh, that's my arm. Okay, I can do this. Oh, okay, here we are. We can do this. We can come out of this again. So I started to develop a mental, I don't have a better word for it, like a mental flexibility and toughness in the sense of, okay, if this needs to happen, body, okay. And if it doesn't need to happen, great. it's okay either way. We're going to work through this type of a thing. Because if I panicked more because it happened, it would increase symptoms.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. So did you develop some tools, you were willing to let it happen if it needed to, and that kind of helped make it so that it became fewer and further between?
No, unfortunately, it started getting worse and worse after a while, to the point that I was still seeing a neurologist. I went, my neurophysical therapist at that point had discovered that when I turned my neck in one direction, I almost passed out. And he was like, you need to be seen for that. And I was like, okay. So I went to the vein specialist. I went to a neurologist again. None of them could find anything. Eventually, I was, praying and praying, looking for anything. And eventually I started looking into upper cervical specialized chiropractors, which you'd think is crazy because of my experience, but I was desperate for relief and I needed to move forward in life and I needed to know what would be best. The other thing that started to help me were infrared saunas, because I was unable to exercise as much as I needed to because of the pain and how much it would set off my motor skills. The infrared sauna, again, one of those things, came out of left field, tried it out, and to this day, it helps me a lot. It helps decrease inflammation. It became a meditative time. It became, I don't know, it just worked magic for my body.
Is that similar to the laser therapy that you're doing?
I don't think so. I believe they're two different things. Infrared sauna does, I don't understand it, to be fair. I don't really know a ton except that
It just works. So
yeah. Found an upper cervical chiropractor, ended up helping me. And then I had that experience I told you earlier. You want me to share that here?
Yeah.
Okay. So I call them shake and bakes at this point, because if I call them anything else, then it was too serious.
Did they have
a
special name for them? Was there like
no.
a scientific name that they gave it?
In fact, at this point, my neurologist said, there's nothing more I can do for you. And I said, cool, you're getting worse and I don't know how to help these. So a lot of seeking, a lot of desperation later. I remember walking out of that appointment. That was when I finally decided to try an infrared sauna, because for long enough, people had been telling me about them. And I was like, no, that won't help me. Anyways, and then it did. I was like, great. Yeah. So there's a couple different kinds of upper cervical chiropractors out there and a couple different techniques. And the first technique I had tried actually took me into a shake and bake that lasted the longest it had ever lasted, which at that point was about an hour and a half of severe pain. I couldn't move, all that stuff. Couldn't really talk. Had to remember to breathe, all that stuff. So I was kind of like, okay, well, this is interesting. Then I discovered that in that technique, they only work on the C1. And then there are certain upper cervical chiropractors that work on your C1 and C2. And so both that chiropractor, and then I finally found another one that works on both. And I felt better about this one for my case. And let's just say, like, I interviewed him really intensely and he was awesome about it and took things slow for me. And the x-rays that he did for me were different than any other imaging I had ever done. I was like, what the? He probably did about 9 or 10 different angles, and he walked me through what he was seeing and why I could be having the shake and bakes. And we just finally found some answers as to why they were happening and how to start to help them. And I had an experience after I saw him. The next weekend was a holiday weekend, and I was at an event, and the shake and bake started happening. And that one lasted 1 hour, and then 2 hours, and then 3 hours. And at that point, I'd even been in an ambulance at that point. They're like, we can take you to the hospital, but I don't think we can do anything for you. And my sweet sister at that point was like, I just have the feeling we need to take you home. So my amazing family dropped all of their things on the holiday, celebrating things to help get me back home. And we ended up calling this doctor, this upper cervical chiropractor. He gave me his personal number, so I didn't call him, right? Couldn't talk to that. And my brother got a hold of him at like 10 o'clock at night and told him what was going on. And he's like, I had this feeling that I needed to stay in town this weekend, even though my family went up to Star Valley, and I'm coming right now. And so he came down, and with a very gentle nudge, that's the other thing I like about that, is they don't ever twist your neck or do anything crazy with it. So he did a slight push and it flipped the switch. My shaking stopped. I could breathe. The pain started to dissipate. It was like a night and day difference. And so I've worked with him, seen some miracles with that. we discovered a few things about my neck and my bones and structure and inflammation. And essentially, we discovered my foramen magnum. That's the hole that your brainstem goes through and your spinal cord starts to go through for your spine, things like that. And to my understanding, people hearing this might be like, that's wrong. But to my understanding, your foramen magnum, that hole, is typically anywhere from like 20 to 33 or something like that millimeters wide. And mine was about 16 millimeters, which was fairly small. And essentially the theory behind it was that my nerves would get inflamed and try to go through that hole and couldn't, and it would cause the motor function problems. And after doing imaging then and then later, miraculously, he's only ever seen one other person have that happen to, but my bone structure actually, the hole increased to the point where it became 19 millimeters instead of 16, which was huge. I attribute that up to God, of course, first and foremost, but I think seeing him for treatments and being able to, as it would grow, I noticed a difference as well in the severity of the shake and bakes. They decreased in severity and how long they would happen.
Wow, that is crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, and amazing. I'm so glad that you're finding that relief and that it's been better. And how long has this process taken? Like from when you had that initial second injury?
Well, I'm still working on a few things with my neck to this day, but it's not nearly as bad as it was. And things are getting better and better all the time with it, I feel like. So
do you feel like, I mean, you're very functional now. From my experience with you, you seem to be doing pretty dang well. Do you feel like you're back other than those few neck things that you're still working on? How are you feeling overall?
Yeah, I feel like people say, are you back? And I feel like I'm better than back. Again, it goes back to that Kaylee 2.0, 3.0, right? I just, my goal is to become better as a human being, closer to God, closer to my family, learning, growing. I love learning. I love helping other people. So really, yes, I feel like when people ask me how recovered I feel, anywhere from 80 to 90%, I feel about to that point. Some days it feels like 95, some days it feels like 80. So maintenance is important for anybody, brain injury or not. So that's important for me as well. And there are different things I do for maintenance. So
yeah. And it sounds like this has set you on a different journey than you were anticipating, probably. Tell us about that. What have you learned through this experience and where has it led you?
Great question. So when I got my bachelor's, I was going to become a therapist, a marriage and family therapist was my thinking. I was going to go get my master's, go do that. After the first brain injury, I felt so alone and like nobody understood me, let alone myself. And I couldn't find anyone that understood me, that could understand and be there and help me. And so all of a sudden I kind of had this inkling of a thought that was like, well, what if you became like a brain injury coach or something? And I just was like, good one. Like I'm still trying to talk, but it kind of kept coming to my mind. And then I mentioned it to my parents and they were like, yeah, what about that? And I was like, guys, what? And then I ended up having what felt like a setback probably a few months after cognitive effects treatment. And we met with Dr. Fong. And my dad was like, hey, Dr. Fong, what do you think if Kaylee became a brain injury coach? And she was like, well, what's your background? So I told her, my bachelor's is behavioral science, and I was planning on becoming a therapist to do this. But anyways, it just seems like a place where people really desperately need help. I know I did, and I couldn't find it. And she was like, oh my gosh, absolutely, you should do that. In fact, she kind of helped jumpstart my coaching. Cognitive FX was going to a brain injury conference. They had a booth going on, and she let me join their booth and launch my business. And she does that with people, which is really cool of her. And so then I've been learning and growing ever since. Brain injury coaching is something I love and I have a passion for. Obviously, having gone through it and seeing other people suffer is never fun. But if you can even just be there, I think that's worth more than gold. So
yeah. Yes. And what techniques have you found are particularly helpful for people who are dealing with brain injuries? What do you use as a coach to help people?
Gauge system, understanding when to do what. I think that's one of the biggest. Relearning safety within your own body and mind is also important, as well as working through the emotions and the mental side as you're able to. Again, that will ebb and flow as well. And there needs to be understanding and give and take with that, as well as helping the survivor and the support system That's one of the reasons I love the gauge system so much, because it helps both parties. It helps the survivor know, okay, well, I'm this, so I need to start doing these things. Then it helps the support system go, oh, Kaylee's not doing so good. She's probably here. And okay, so I should probably let her be in her room and I'll cancel that appointment, or something to that effect. Higher power, having a higher power is important, whatever that may be, whether that's internal or external or whatever it is. And the ability to recognize, it's hopeful in the sense that you never have to settle. Just because something is doesn't mean it can't change. So why not be open to it? I'd say is one of the biggest things.
And I know you've been doing research also on primitive reflexes, right? What have you found with that?
Yeah, I love primitive reflexes. Dr. Duvall in his office helped me learn a lot about what I know. And then over the last, since August, I've been doing different research and diving into how it could help patients at Cognitive effects with nervous system regulation. So we use them there a little bit differently than they're used pretty much everywhere else at this point that I know of, but we utilize them to help regulate the nervous system. And what each of us have primitive reflexes when we're in the womb till like 1 to 2 years old. These reflexes are like our foundational wiring in our brain that we're born with, that help us learn to move, help us learn to breathe, learn to eat, all of those various things. And then as we utilize them, that foundational wiring in our brain, we start to develop more complex wiring in our brain, complex movement, complex speech, complex eating, right? Just complex tasks, which means we get to dive into that executive functioning more. And all of a sudden, the 2-year-old learns to say no, even though they don't quite understand. And so that foundational wiring is meant to kind of become dormant and go into the more complex wiring of your brain. And so when you get a brain injury, typically your body, your nervous system goes into that fight or flight mode, which to my understanding means it likes to switch back into the old wiring, which can actually cause more problems for people recovering. So we've discovered that utilizing specific exercises, physical exercises can help regulate the nervous system at times as another tool to assist. It's fairly new. I'm still learning. Who knows what I'll say in a few months about it all, but so far it's been really promising and I've been really grateful for it as a tool.
Thank you. Excellent. So I know we've kind of gone through a lot of the details of the story here. Thank you for sharing what you have. I think it is really important for people to hear each other's stories and to know what you've gone through, because your experience is yours and everybody else has their own, but I'm sure that some of it overlaps with a lot of other people's stories and experiences. And so just knowing that you're not alone in that can be, I think, very therapeutic and helpful. That's one of the things that we see a lot at Cognitive FX. At least I get to see patients coming together who have been going through these experiences on their own. Even if they have loving, supportive people around them, it's hard to know. And everybody's experience is their own, but being able to share it and recognize pieces of yours and others can just be really helpful for people, I think. So thank you for sharing what you have today. So what advice would you give to people who are dealing with a brain injury? It's interesting because most of, my experience working with people, and also this, podcast is all about concussions, but kind of just brain injury more generally. And the brain injuries that you've specifically experienced have not been concussions, but still very legitimate brain injuries. And like, how can people who are dealing with a brain injury, however they got it, cope, and what would you recommend for them?
So you're saying for somebody who just had a brain injury, or
either they just barely had it or they've been dealing with it for a long time, what advice would you give them?
Throw pride out the window. There's no room for it when you're in recovery. Let it go and ask for help, and continue asking for help until you find it. There are more resources out there than anybody tends to really know. Remind yourself of that and become your own best friend as well through this experience. There are resources out there, like especially if you are in the United States, each state has a brain injury alliance. So there's the Brain Injury Alliance of Utah, Brain Injury Alliance of Arizona. There's brain injury alliances all around. which can have resources for you. You can always go to their website. A lot of times they'll have support groups you can attend, or they'll know of different support groups going on. They'll have resources or case managers to help you discover if you can go on disability for a short time, or what you can do to help manage the symptoms while financially figuring things out. I think the other thing is if you're having a bad depressive day, that's okay. Have it and then move on. Start to experience gratitude. Force yourself where you can. Like, I'm grateful for my mug. Grateful I can breathe. Grateful I can see. Start with the basics. Then there's association as well. There's the Brain Injury Alliance Association of America. That is actually separate from the Brain Injury Alliance. And they also can have resources and tools for people who are struggling with brain injury. Now, just because it says concussion versus brain injury, a concussion is a type of brain injury, so don't be afraid by that terminology. And just because it is mild doesn't mean it's mild for you. And so it is real. If you're experiencing symptoms, you are. That's it. Go find help.
And when you say look for help, ask for help, that's not just from your support system around you, but like go searching. There are resources out there. So
absolutely. They can always reach out to me and you however they need to. Yes. I know both of us are always happy to talk to whoever, whenever, and help them find some type of resource. So yeah, that's why I say the Brain Injury Alliance of each state, because each state is typically fine-tuned to different resources within your own state. If you're outside of the states, I'm not as familiar with international brain injury associations, but again, there are resources out there. Start Googling, start researching, find them. They're there.
Yes. And even the Cognitive FX website has tons of information and education materials that you can learn things like what kind of diet is good for you, like whether it's okay to fly on an airplane right after you've had a brain injury or not, things like that. There are lots of resources and answers out there. And what advice would you give to people who are supporting, like the support system, people who want to help but don't know how? Someone who loves someone who's had a brain injury.
Yeah. Believe them when they're struggling, when they're suffering. Just believe them. Be there and take care of yourself so that you can be there. I think listening goes a long ways for anyone. So when somebody's going through a concussion or brain injury, they're going through a sense of loss and grief and pain. So being gentle towards that, even if you don't comprehend the loss.
All right. Is there anything else that you want people to know about concussions or your experience, or just generalized advice for people before we end here?
It's possible to find joy along the journey, even if it's a recovery journey. It's possible. And it's okay. No matter where you're at, that's okay. That's okay. Again, as far as advice goes, keep it simple where you can and let pride go so you can recover.
How did you find joy in your recovery journey?
Very small things, like breathing is how I started. Grateful I can breathe, grateful for the sunshine on my face, grateful for the wind, grateful I could drive my car for a minute, grateful I could write for a minute, grateful I could speak what I needed to say for a minute or for 2 minutes, grateful for my family, grateful for my God. Gratitude helped me a lot to turn it into joy. And so there are times in your recovery with brain injury or concussion that you can't typically, like there's such a physical response emotionally, you can't seem to change things. And it's okay if you're in that spot as well. Eventually the clouds will start to dissipate, and be ready to see the silver linings as they come.
That's beautiful. Thank you. So if people are interested in working with you specifically, how can they get a hold of you? Where should they go to find you?
Yeah, they can go to braininjurycoach.com. They can sign up right there to schedule appointments with me. They can always access me by my email. It's tbiquestions77@gmail. And they can always text or call as well. I do better with text than phone call currently because of all of the people I get to work with, which is wonderful, in different capacities. So
awesome. And we can include that in the show notes. So access that there. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your experience and wisdom and knowledge with us. And you're awesome. Thank you so much, Kaylee.
Really grateful for you, Bethany. I'm grateful that we get to work together. And I'm grateful for your go-get-em personality.
I love your gratitude. It's so good. Well, have a great day. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you listened in today. I hope you have gained some helpful insights and inspiration regarding dealing with and recovering from concussions. My goal is to create more awareness and education about concussions and the fact that there is so much that can be done to improve life after someone has had one. Help me spread the message by liking, commenting, rating, and subscribing to this podcast, and share it with others who would benefit from hearing it. There are more resources available on my website. And again, if you or someone you love would benefit from concussion coaching, sign up for a free consultation using the link in the show notes or at my website, www.theconcussioncoach.com. Thank you. See you next time, and take good care of that amazing brain of yours.